Hi friends. Tonight I'm going to be teaching you how to make a flourless chocolate cake because Vickie wants one, and so I'm going to make one for her. This recipe comes off the King Arthur Flours website, but it's flourless, so maybe somebody from their marketing department is going to lose their job. And the first thing in the recipe is a cup of either bittersweet or semi-sweet chocolate. So it doesn't really matter which one you use, but I would use a different one for the frosting, so they are slightly different. So for the cake, I like to use a bittersweet, and I like the frosting to be a little bit sweeter, so I'll use a semi-sweet for that because bittersweet's a little bit less sweet than semi-sweet. So what you do to melt chocolate is you can put it in a double boiler. This is a cheap little one that comes from IKEA, just this thing that goes in a pot. You can also just use a glass bowl over a pot of boiling water, or you can use a microwave. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting chocolate in a microwave. The only thing you got to be careful of is to do it very slowly. So like 30 seconds and check to see if you can stir it, 40 seconds, check to see if you can stir it, and just do it in increments until it becomes stirrable. And don't put it in the microwave until it's all the way melted. Like take it out because it'll continue to melt sort of naturally as you stir it. And when it gets completely melted, it'll kind of look like this. And this one already has the butter in it. So the 8 tablespoons of butter that it calls for is basically a cube, just looks like that. I'm sure you have one of those in your refrigerator. And if you are using salted butter, I would leave the salt out of this recipe, but it called for unsalted butter and I happen to have some. So anyway, the chocolate's nice and melty and ready. And so I'm gonna go ahead and put it in my mixing bowl. Let me get that out of the way. So we'll just put that in here. Like that. All right. And then the next thing it calls for is 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. And so we'll stick that in there. And it asks for a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And since I had unsalted butter, I'm going to put that in there. So as you're stirring this up, it'll cool the chocolate off a little bit. And that's what you have to do before you put the eggs in, so the eggs don't curdle. And so it's looking grainy and weird, but it'll soften up in a minute. So then you put the eggs in. So that's 3 beaten eggs, 3 large eggs. Oh, speaking of that, I've decided to go ahead and put together a little website for these recipes so you don't have to search all over the web, but I'm like, this one's here and this one's there. So I'm working on that. I should have that up this weekend. Okay, so then you have the eggs all incorporated into the chocolate and sugar. And then you'll be using, I can't find this. Oh, 1/2 cup of Dutch processed cocoa. So there's the cocoa. I actually don't know if this is Dutch processed, frankly. I have no idea. I'm gonna put that in. I'm actually gonna switch to my whisk here so I can get that incorporated a little bit better. So there we go. All right, so now we got this all together and we're getting that in the chocolate. You know what I had a problem with? I was trying to figure out what the difference was between cocoa and cacao, and it turns out that the difference is $8, and the fact that cocoa is roasted and cacao is not roasted. So isn't that interesting? The raw one is a lot more expensive. I'm not exactly sure why, and I'm not exactly sure why they're used in some different applications, because cacao is used a lot in raw foods and vegan recipes, and cocoa does taste like a little bit darker, a little bit harder to use raw, I think, because it's got a real dark flavor. All right, so we'll get this all incorporated. Now the eggs are all in there. The other thing that this recipe calls for is espresso powder. I don't have espresso powder, but I had instant coffee, so I figure how bad could it be? This was the one from Trader Joe's. So get that all in there. All right, and a teaspoon of vanilla. So I'm gonna put a teaspoon of vanilla in here. There we go. Oops. It's a lot more than a teaspoon. Oops. Oh yeah, that's gonna work out. Okay. All right, that's everything. So it wants you to only stir this until everything is incorporated. And this is a very thick batter. Like I said, it's kind of like a brownie batter. So it's not gonna pour quite like a cake batter. So I decided in this case, instead of using an 8-inch pan, which is what it called for, I was wanting to use these little ramekins because I thought they'd be really cute and that I could take one over to Vickie's house. And so I pour this, it makes 3 of these. It makes 3 of these ramekins, so I pour them in there. And it gets cooked for about 16 minutes. Now the original recipe calls for it a lot longer, but when you have a smaller container, it doesn't cook for quite as long. So how can you tell when these are done? Well, it's really interesting because flourless cakes, just like brownies, are always gooey, so you can't really use the toothpick test. So what you're going to want to do is, I got cocoa everywhere. So what you're going to want to do is get your instant read thermometer, and you should test it in the oven for 140. So these are going to go in the oven at 375 for about 16 minutes until the middle reads 140. So one of the things that we were talking about was that I should have a gadget corner. And so this is my gadget corner for today. This is a Thermapen, and it's a really, really good instant read thermometer, and don't take no substitutions. Really look for that brand name because it's the best thermometer I've ever used. All right. So when these come out of the oven, you know why I do everything ahead of time? Because I don't know how to edit video. That's why. So that's why all this stuff is cooked ahead of time. So anyway, when it comes out of the oven, it's going to look like a delicious fudgy little brownie, just like that, which is really kind of cool. And when it's in the oven, what you're going to do is you're going to make your frosting. Now, this frosting that I'm making is a ganache, which also some people call a glaze. And a ganache is different from a frosting because it doesn't contain a lot of extra stuff. Like there's no butter and powdered sugar like when you make a cream cheese frosting. It's only 2 things. It's a 1/2 cup of heavy cream and 1 cup of chocolate, and that's all it is. And so what you're going to want to do when you're making a ganache is that you put your heavy cream on the stove for just a few minutes, just until it heats up and it just starts to bubble around the edges, and you don't want to boil it. And then you put your chocolate chips into it and you let it sit for 5 minutes. Take it off the heat, let it sit for 5 minutes. And then as soon as the chocolate chips break down and you can stir them up, and that becomes your ganache. And if it has like little bits in it, just let it sit for a little longer and do it a little bit more. It's always better to do it in a glass bowl so you can shove it in the microwave for just a few seconds. So that's how you make ganache. Well, I didn't show you how to make ganache because I made it ahead of time because I don't know how to edit video. So this is what it looks like when it's done. And you can see it's really creamy and shiny and delicious looking. And the way that I kept it hot was I put a towel in boiling water and sat it on there. So it's actually been keeping for quite a long time. I learned this trick when I was making Christmas candy, because what I usually do is take a crock pot and put towels in the bottom and wet it and turn the crock pot on, and then you put your plastic bottles of chocolate in there, and then the towels keep the chocolate soft, and then you can use it to pour it in when you're making Christmas candy. So I just figured, since I was using hot towels for that, I might as well use it for this, and it really worked. So when you get your ganache done, just put it aside, and you can keep it warm this way or just put it aside for a minute. You're gonna want to let these cakes cool completely before you put anything on them. And I was going to actually show you this. So the way that most people do ganache is, or if they're doing a glaze, is that they'll put the cake on a pan and put a little rack there, and then you can just pour it over. But if your ganache is a little bit thick and you don't want to pour it like that, you can just spoon it on. So let's spoon a little bit of this on here. And you can let it run over the sides. And what I did on this, when I was doing this earlier, was I let it run over the sides, and then I used an offset spatula to kind of smooth it around, the sides. And if you're gonna use this method or the pour method, and you're gonna end up with a lot of ganache in your pan, the best thing for you to do is to put some wax paper down. And that way, when you're done and you pull the cake off, the chocolate that's on the wax paper doesn't have to go to waste. You can actually take it off, peel it off, and use it for something else. So anyway, that's what it looks like when it's frosted. And then the recipe called for some little raspberries on the top. And these are pandemic raspberries. I had to cut a bitch at the grocery store to get these. I'm kidding, I didn't, but it felt like it. Actually stood in line for 30 minutes to get these. And I don't want to let anything go to waste now because I hate going to the grocery store these days. So you put some raspberries on there. And it also called for a little powdered sugar at the top. Hey, if you run out of powdered sugar and you don't want to go to the store because of what's going on right now, just put some regular sugar in a food processor and just beat the hell out of it and you get powdered sugar. And I like to use one of these little tea balls because then you can really control how much you put in there. And so that's what it looks like when it's done. So let me show you the way I would serve it if I were on a date night. Are we ever going to go on date nights again? I don't think so. I don't know. I actually signed up for a dating app the other day because I was like, I mean, what else am I doing? And I also thought it was good because like I'm not going to meet anybody because we can't, so it takes the pressure off. So I'm sitting there on the dating app and I'm like this: dead fish, motorcycle, motorcycle, mullet, dead fish, mullet, motorcycle, dead fish. Although I am a little bit of a defender of the mullet, I think it's a pretty practical haircut. So if I were on a date, this is how I would serve it. So what I like to do is, this is actually a candle plate turned upside down. I think it's actually an IKEA candle plate turned upside down. And then I just have, you know, a little cheese cover on there. And that way when somebody comes to your house, it's, ta-da, it's impressive. So if I do say so myself, well, that was braggy. So anyway, I'm going to package this up and take it over to Vickie's house, and I think she'll be happy to see it. Let me see if there's anything else on this big giant list of things I wanted to tell you. Difference between frosting and ganache. No, I think that's about it. Oh, the other thing about this cake that I did want to tell you is two things. One is it's not going to rise because it doesn't have any leavening in it. So however thick you want to make it or put it in a pan is kind of how it's going to turn out. And the second thing I wanted to tell you about this was when you are making a chocolate cake, you're going to grease these guys, right? In most cake pans, you're actually going to put some parchment in the bottom. I don't with these because the bottom's removable, so it doesn't matter as much. But if you're going to flour your pans, if you're doing a chocolate cake, be sure to flour your pans in cocoa so that it matches the chocolate cake and then it doesn't look all weird when it comes out. So that's everything on my list. I hope you're doing okay. I'll be back with some more shows. I meant to do one last weekend, but I had to clean the kitchen and my OCD got in the way because I had to take everything out of every cabinet and put it all back. So hopefully this Sunday I'll do another one for you. Okay, nice to see you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.